yeah, whenever you're ready, take it away. Thank you so much for giving a talk for us tonight. I'm really excited to hear all about your projects. So yeah, whenever you're ready, fire away.
Thank you for having me. Okay, so little introduction to Mugs, otherwise known as Matthew. So I'm a hacker. I've been a hacker. I've identified as a hacker since I was 13, which was before I had any technical skills. So it was, I think, a reaction to watching the film Hackers. And so I decided that I was a hacker. And it wasn't actually until I got hacked that I realized that I wasn't really a hacker. And that happened when I was 13. And yeah, so at that point, I realized I needed to kind of get some technical chops and learn what being a hacker actually meant. So that was back in 1998. I started looking into the type of technologies that the hacking community is essentially based around. So I found myself in the world of open source and Linux. So Linux being open source operating system, I think that the notion of like being able to walk into a library and have access to any kind of information and knowledge is quite similar to the premise behind open source, in that anybody who wishes to can contribute or devour the software that's produced by the open source community. So on that basis, basically because it's free software, I found that very interesting, and I was able to go into the library and I was able to teach myself how to essentially be a professional hacker using resources that were on the internet and also that were in the library. So basically by reading books, such as there was one I remember from when I was about 14 called Unix for Dummies, and that was being able to have free access to information, free access to technology made a massive difference. And that's something that I've incorporated very much into my my artistic practice. So I wear a couple of different hats, and so one of them is obviously the hacker hat. The other one is being an artist, using sound and audio as my medium. So being like quite a technical person, I published several research papers in the field of audio engineering, and have had the privilege of like traveling the world lecturing in Japan and America and Europe, talking on subjects such as like the future of audio and the combination of the internet and sound. So I've seen a lot of progression in the last 15 years since I started working with sound, working over the internet. And yeah, so as a sound artist, I thought I'd combine those practices. So what I do is I work with data, and I'll give you a little quick view of my portfolio. So the kind of things that I work with are, for example, this is Malignancy, which is a sound art piece which is made from the recording of a chemotherapy machine in active use, which is recorded both the sound as well as the electromagnetic interference and the contact vibrations that are produced by the machine while it's in use. And then I turn that into a composition, yeah, that's a piece I'm still working on actually. And then this one is from so this is like literally a hacking one. So this is an attack on a nuclear facility, which I took the sound of the data. So in my portfolio, I say that the sound of a modem, like the classic sound of the modem, is the sound of the internet, and that is the sound of data. So the boinga boinga sort of noise that we associate with the 90s dial-up, that's the sound of data. So I like to play with that because it is literally sound being sent to a speaker by a modem. So there's also works that I do which are around perception, such as my work 32 kilohertz, which is working with sound that's above the frequencies that we can hear. So it's the kind of thing that dogs and bats would be able to listen to. but by essentially putting that into a network of audio devices that decay the signal over time, it becomes like a very loud and completely unignorable sound, as initially starting silence. And I've also got like field recording work, which has nothing to do with data, other than the fact that I had a watch, which is also a microphone. So I got consensual recording of quite a interesting conversation between an artist and a schizophrenic crack addict. So that's a view of like that. This is work going back a few years, going back the last 14 years when I started practicing. And I think with isolation coming into play, that's where I thought it'd be really interesting to start combining the aesthetics of hacking. So there's like, what the internet look like to a hacker, which I'll give you a little view of. It looks very different to what you'd expect, or maybe what you're used to. So the motivation for the Heist show was to demonstrate, just like we're seeing on the screen now, what a terminal looks like. So this is called a terminal, and this is what we associate with hackers sitting there and typing into a terminal, which is very much like what we do, and is a very important part of our technical skill set. So the motivation for it was really to show that right now, as a society, we're all on the internet. But the internet looks different to different people depending on what kind of connectivity they've got, what kind of thing that they're interested in. So to a programmer, the internet would look a bit more like this. Certainly to a hacker, we definitely rely on, we must have green text. It's very important for us to have green text. So the Heist show, just to define what Heist is a chat room exhibition. So this is it live, still going. So it's an exhibition in a chat room, and this is what the internet looks like to the hacker community, like going back 20 years. So I grew up using IRC, which means Internet Relay Chat. So whereas now we would use things like Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp to communicate with each other, IRC was very much the kind of de facto communication vehicle. And what's quite interesting is that like WhatsApp itself actually came from somebody that was in my peer group on IRC from 20 years ago. So there was a hacker group called Woo Woo, and so Woo Woo, so Jan from Woo Woo, he was one of the hackers that he's the founder of WhatsApp. So it's quite interesting to see the crossover of like modern technology with IRC technology. So like the notion, for example, of us having a hashtag. Now a hashtag comes from IRC. So for example, if somebody is interested in a particular subject, then they could join an IRC, what's called channel, and that channel would essentially be a hashtag. Like we can see down here, we can see it says Heist on my screen, just at the bottom in the blue bit. And that's the channel, it's called Heist. So on IRC, you have a channel. It's exactly the same premise as having a hashtag on Twitter or Instagram. So another one of the peers from that hacker group, from Woo Woo, was Chris Napster, who was the founder of Napster. So like the kind of communities that were being formed, say, between the last 23 and 15 years ago, they've gone on to like really define what the internet looks like. And for example, there's also, like I've mentioned on my screen here, Darknet, like the Darknet. I've got the original Darknet here, which I was an operator in 20 years ago. As we can see, there's only like a handful of people actually using Darknet now, but the Darknet, as we think of it now, which is where people use the Tor browser to kind of have anonymous access, the Darknet on this IRC network was the first trading place, and it was exclusively for hackers to communicate and essentially sell exploit code. Exploit code is like a commodity. So the kind of thing that that government entities do now is they buy, say, for example, a way of hacking somebody's iPhone remotely. They would buy that from a security researcher. They pay a fair amount of money, and then they would essentially use it as discreetly as possible without getting caught, or without it getting burned, is the expression, for as long as they could. So this, like the notion of the dark net comes from from IRC, and that actually, the collapse of this original dark net was because the FBI started monitoring it, and they started arresting people, which is fair enough, because there were it was a very dangerous place. It's like the Wild West of the internet, and that was where I cut my teeth. And I've got here, so talking about CNN, like anecdotally speaking, when 9/11 happened, before it was on the news, there was a brand new news channel, an IRC channel that was spun up called #CNN. And I remember being at work. I was 16 when that happened, and I remember on IRC I was hearing about 9/11 in real time on the CNN, which wasn't anything to do with CNN. It was just a way of spinning up a news channel on IRC, and hearing in real time about people like having secondary reports of their relatives that were in the area. And then about an hour after that had all been kicking off, I remember seeing it on the news while I was at work, and one of my colleagues was like, "Oh, look, this looks scary." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, no, I was already aware of that. It was because of IRC basically opening up communication channels for people." So so what the internet actually looks like, right? So I'm going to give you a little view of what the internet actually looks like from the perspective of, say, 30 years ago. So it would have looked like this. So this is this section up here. This is what's called ASCII art. So this is where characters are used, which are linguistic characters. They're repurposed to create visual images. So this is what's called a bulletin board system. And since the late 80s, these have been used before people were using the internet. People were using bulletin board systems, and they would look like this. And this is also how the equivalent of a zine or a publication would be distributed, just as a text file. And that's because essentially, like, the internet wasn't fast enough to transmit actual images. But by creating images such as these, it was possible to immediately disseminate that across the internet without waiting for things to load. So you can imagine, like, right now, like, if we were to use a modern internet messaging system, we would be sending images, GIFs, and so on, which could be like 1 megabyte in size, which 20 years ago would have been extremely significant. 30 years ago would have been virtually unthinkable. So the internet looked like this. And I remember when I was a teenager, I used to use a text browser, and I still do, where the internet does still look like this. And there aren't images other than the ones that we can see here, like this, the ASCII art. And I thought it was something that was worth bringing to the attention of everybody while we were on the internet in our isolation, to demonstrate just what the internet would have looked like. So that's kind of the environment behind Heist. So the environment is that it's in a chat room. The environment puts constraints onto the kind of images that go into the chat room, because they have to be created with characters. They have to be created with letters in our alphabet. So working with those constraints, I was intrigued in like the notion of what happens to the ownership of a visual artwork when it's converted into ASCII. So I started experimenting. So on the screen, what we can see here is we've got this computer-generated 3D render, which was made by a conceptual artist called Evan Lee in South Korea. And then it was redrawn by hand by a photographer called Xing Ming Musi. And when I saw those two images, I wasn't sure which one was the original. And that's really what tickled me. I thought, well, I don't know which one is a copy of which one. And then I thought, but what about if I turn it into text? And we can see the chat room manifestation of it on the right, where the question of who owns that image now, or what that image even is, I found that quite an interesting thing. So I set about talking to people about plagiarism and about theft of ideas, and like the notion that good artists copy, great artists steal. So the concept and the environment, bringing that together so that it was actually usable by people that aren't tech savvy, that aren't able, like, so for example, I'm using what's called an IRC client to access the exhibition right now. It's unreasonable to expect the general art-loving people who aren't already using IRC to know how to get onto that. So instead of forcing, although I wanted to present it in its real-time form, there needed to be a way of accessing the IRC channel without it being technically difficult. So this is where the website came into play. So the website itself is highstart.com, and highstart.com is quite a feat of engineering, because this is so what we're seeing now is the same thing, except that it's accessible simply by going to a website, by going to highstart.com. This does several things without the audience ever realizing. This actually starts a Linux operating system in their web browser. So whether they're running Windows desktop or whether they're running Mac OS, they are now actually immersed in a Linux environment. So this is giving that view of, like, what does the internet look like to a hacker? And this is what it looks like. It looks like a Linux terminal. So we often have green text on black. That's what I call hacker green. It's something I've started talking about getting it trademarked. So I'd be interested in seeing if that's possible this year. But yeah, so by virtue of having this website, it means that people are able to connect to it and see it just the same as like, say, for example, if I was going to connect to it, I wouldn't necessarily use the website. I would be using my actual Linux terminal. But this technology enables people to have a Linux browser start in their a Linux operating system start in the browser, and then some kind of magic happens behind the scenes that connect the person straight into the Heist Art chat room. So, like, that's all happening behind the scenes, and like, to continue the whole open source paradigm, which I've basically dedicated my life to, all of the code for this is all open source as well. So it's all available. If anybody ever wishes to reuse it, then they're very welcome to. So the tech R&D that went into building that was fairly significant, and also the like the testing of it on various devices is the kind of thing which that like for a normal company that would require a whole team of people, but for this show it was essentially just the Heist crew themselves. So as I mentioned, good artists steal, good artists copy, great artists steal. So there's an interesting element to the theft of art, and like the whole idea of like stealing art and presenting it in this chat room, it ties back to a couple of things in terms of its contextualization. In terms of like deliberate theft, which has been then just pasted, copied and pasted. Like, this is an example of an actual theft from Cisco, who were hacked by somebody from the darknet, somebody from Russia called Franz, and basically they'd hacked Cisco, and then they pasted source code, like as in the building blocks of our telecommunications system, was stolen by a Russian hacker, and then just essentially shown to the FBI in that darknet chat room that I showed you. And that's one example from a technical perspective. And then from an artistic perspective, there was the theft of the Mona Lisa, which is actually based on the kind of techniques that modern hackers would use. So this is what we call a social engineering attack, because the thieves were able to actually walk in and just pick up, by dressing in the right overalls, they just walked into the Louvre and just took the Mona Lisa. So there's like a couple of different flavors of theft. So we were keen on using the Mona Lisa for our promotion of Heist, because it's just such a great story. And I'll talk about the people that were involved, and of course the actual story behind that. That's available on the My Tetra website, which you can see here is at yourtetra.com/data, which has been put together by Gemma, who's on the call here. And so it was inspiration for Picasso, but it was also inspiration for us, because it's just such an iconic thing to steal. And actually the theft of the Mona Lisa, that's something that we had in one of our works that we exhibited, was actually Beyonce and Jay-Z standing in front of the Mona Lisa, but with the middle of the Mona Lisa turned into ASCII, which is a lovely piece. So that's available on there. So also in terms of like the cinematic influence of the heist, like the whole notion of the heist, movies like The Italian Job or Ocean's 11 or 12 or 13 or however many of them are, they all have these instantly recognizable tropes that are funny and also very daring. And I think that notion of daringness, that's something that's quite fun to play with. Like the notion of actually, so all the artworks that are presented, they've all either ripped off some like another artwork, or they've got material that's actually been put together by like a fashion designer, or we had several fashion house rip-offs and rip-offs of other artists and counterfeit goods, and that whole notion of encouraging plagiarism in a playful way was one of the driving factors for the heist. And for me personally, I just found there was a Rick and Morty episode, the heist episode, that it really tickled me. And just the idea of like, I'm in, and playing with those tropes and assembling a crew, and everybody in the crew, they all offered something completely unique, which is a callback to the trope of the cinematic heist. So assembling that crew, pulling that all together, that was fantastic. It was great fun. I think that was one of the key things, is that this was it was an experimental and playful exhibition where when we were pulling the pieces together, there was a lot of experimentation, and essentially the rules were nick something, steal it. That's it. That's the rule. And that meant that we got to play with ideas, or whatever it was that was that unique offering that the crew brought, that the member of the crew brought, that everybody was able to contribute something that was markedly unique. And it was a pleasure to work with everybody that was on there. So we had 3 cities that were involved in it. So we got Berlin, Cambridge, and London. And I think that, again, is another callback to the cinematic trope. It's like I can kind of imagine the organizer of the heist traveling to each one of these cities and collecting whatever, a lockpicker in Berlin and a safecracker in Cambridge. And so that's exactly what happened. So we got filmmakers from Cambridge, and of course Robert Good on the language front, and tying up with the Berlin crew. The Berlin crew brought visual works, which, a bit like Robert's work, had a callback to language. So there were a couple of works which had similar labelling, which you can see in the exhibition. That there is a wonderful like mixture between language and the image. Because the images are made of language, that made it all the more fun to connect the dots there. And then, of course, we had the Rising Sun Collective, like a whole bunch of contributions from the Rising Sun Collective in Peckham, which was having so many artists in one place made it actually quite straight. So, but essentially, the Rising Sun Collective actually live together, which made it quite straightforward to communicate as a group. And have a play with ideas and throw ideas around. So we didn't have any Zoom calls. Everything we did was just over WhatsApp, and the final submissions were over email. And then I basically just pulled those together into essentially actually a piece of software that I wrote which I finished minutes before the exhibition started, which automated publishing the program notes, curator notes, and actually demonstrating, showing the images as well. So, for example, this is work from Paula over in Berlin. I'll give you a view of what these actually look like, but the play with texture and light when something is converted into ASCII, it gives a very unique aesthetic, and actually it's completely different to the internet aesthetic. It's its own visual language. So we can see because a lot of these actually started as 3D models or photographs. That means that we get such a markedly different view, but we get the same green on black. And so it's like there's a dislocation from the origins of ASCII art. And what I hope is to build upon that with these pieces. Some of them are quite conceptual. Like there's one of them which is really tickled me, is was by Julian Brown, and it calls back conceptually and contextually to the IRC network that I mentioned that Napster was, the founder of Napster was on. He was on IRC, and so Julian Brown took the Metallica albums that led to the lawsuit that shut Napster down, and Julian converted those into binary, and then we converted the binary back into ASCII. So we can see here an example of the labeling that I was talking about. This is Robert Good's work, Affirmative Action. We can see that the actual words, so this should say yes, but the actual words are lost. And I find that an interesting proposition. We lose the words and we just get this kind of coarse representation of the words. So that actually says yes, but we only know that because we've seen the original, which is quite a fun way of playing with it. So so this is we've got some quite aesthetic examples, and then with Julian's one, it is just essentially a lot of noise, a very conceptual piece, but with some good background that calls back to what was going on IRC 20 years ago. So when we kicked the exhibition off, that was at 7:30 p.m. on the 10th of December 2020, and it was an exhibition that was going to be happening then, lasting for the amount of time that it would take for all of these artworks to be shown. Another one of Robert Good's here. This is Sorted. And then after the curated works were shown, after we had our crew show their work, then the baton was handed over to the audience. So which was great fun, and this ties into the whole open source philosophy that drives everything that I do personally, is that the audience they kept the show going for 3 or 4 hours with their own ASCII art contributions and chatter. And actually, I had intended to show a whole range of other works after, like slightly more naughty ASCII works, things that were not actually in the public domain or were not original artworks. But the audience kept it going so vibrantly and with such enthusiasm that I didn't feel right interrupting them. So we've got a capture of all of that as it was happening. So what I've done is I've got this capture of somebody made actual artwork, especially for my Tetra. In the middle, I mean, it's quite a gruesome image. It says Mugs in the middle with quite a famous image called Goatsy. And essentially we can see here that there were hours of people just chatting, Hack the Planet, and all these images that come through. And none of this is curated. All of this is just completely audience contributed. And it went on for absolutely hours. We got a lovely one there of Yoda with a Hack the Planet message. And there's an interesting kind of constraint, which is that whenever somebody would leave or enter the chat room, that it would interrupt the image. And that means that we get this kind of fragmentation, which actually is quite interesting, I feel. And also people could interrupt each other. So there was no elitism of something being hung on the wall here. It was very much you're in a chat room with a bunch of hackers, and whatever, that's completely self-policing. So it went on till, till I asked, are we finished at 11:30? So that went on for quite a while. And I thought, so the only extra artwork that I personally put on was the Evan Lee and Zin Musi image that I showed earlier, because I'm a big fan of that one. I think the contours and that are just lovely. So yeah, so at the point where I felt like I wasn't interrupting the audience, which I think is quite a fun paradigm to be operating in, like that I don't want the curator doesn't want to interrupt the audience. I quite like that. So also something that I did in the hacker community was I invited my hacker cronies to actually hack the server, and at 10:37 we did, and one of my hacker colleagues, he managed to get through some of the restrictions that we put on the web IRC site, and he managed to actually do what's called executing commands on the server. So that was brilliant. So he's won some swag for that, because I said anybody that hacks it can get themselves a t-shirt. So I'm really happy about that, because I feel that really that was the whole point of it. Like we are completely vulnerable, and I think vulnerability is a very important thing. So we can get out the text realm a bit more now, so we can actually have a look at some of the images. We can see what is the exhibition actually, what's it portraying? For example, what is this? Oh, it's Happy Birthday. So that's Happy Birthday. So here's some of the original artworks which we got on the site fakefakefakes.com, because they are genuine fakes. All of them are genuine fakes. So we can see, for example, we've got this lovely painting by Billy Colours with the Coca-Cola on it. So anything with a brand name, anything which is stealing something, that's all good to go. So for example, we've got, I'll talk a bit about the top left thing, data blocks. This was my contribution, the execution of a violin, which is made from stock photography. So I'm passing off something which I've essentially paid for and bought. I'll just put some text on it, and I call it my work now. That's mine now. I'll have that. So that kind of gives a theme. Brand name, ripping off brand names, like this is so for example, Jessie, this one down here, that's a rip off of Balenciaga. So she's dressed up a motorbike in clothes that actually she's designed all of those clothes. And then we've got another fashion rip off here, which is a rip off of Versace by Paula in Berlin. And so there are some of these materials, like for example, we've got this lovely one from Murney Werns, this is not just a hazmat suit, this is an M&S hazmat suit, and it's £29, so it's good value. So that, like, having the use of brand names and ripping off other artists, like for example, we've got Robert Good's excellent, ideally I would have thought of this idea, which looks fantastic in ASCII as well. I must say that one looks very good. And then the notion of the Happy Birthday score as well. What's in that image is actually a copyright, and the idea that Happy Birthday is a copyrighted as a score can then be copyrighted is fantastic. So then just ripping that off into ASCII, where it's a completely different type of score. And speaking as a sound artist, like you can have, like, literally anything can be a score. And then there's the image that I mentioned earlier, which is Gemma's work, which we can see has been nicely hackerized with a bit of ASCII. And then the Julian Brown's work, which is the Metallica album that Lars from Metallica was so furious about. And then we've got the Supreme Money Gun from Scott Bowley's quite a fun one, because it's not really made by Supreme. It's a counterfeit money gun for shooting fake money out of, which is just beautifully absurd. but it's been bought with real money, as Scott said in a roundtable that we did, with a bit of discussion about counterfeiting and plagiarism and so on. And then we got our rip-off T-shirt of Pro Plus, Feel More ASCII, by Gemma, and we've got Robert Good's book, A New Dictionary of Art, with thousands of definitions of art from the internet. We've got a real fake Stradivarius. We've got real fake money, not just any old fake money, but gaming tokens. A real fake Picasso. We've got a fake pair of boxer shorts, but a real genuine contemporary fake. And we've got Phil Mitchell signed picture. So that gives you a view of what the actual artworks actually looked like before they were converted into ASCII. So I mean, they are really, really very different when you see them in the flesh. And that's what makes it makes it a completely different kind of different medium, different ownership. I think that's an interesting thing to talk about, like who owns it once you do that. Whose is it? That's one of the fundamental questions that Heist is looking to ask. That was put together by Gemma, the fakefakefakes.com. So that's another kind of documentation of Heist that can live on past it. And also one of the important vectors for us was that our like social media gives people advice on how to avoid actually getting hacked in the first place. So although we're playing with the idea of hacker culture and ASCII art and so on, and also getting hacked ourselves benevolently, fortunately, we do disseminate information about how people can protect themselves online, because it's something of dark art to most people. I think the whole world of like how do you insert cybersecurity. So that's something that we're going to keep on doing, and I think it's important to try and help people as much as possible to avoid being targeted and victimized by the nefarious bad guys that are out there. And so another artifact that came out of Heist are the data blocks. So these are the data blocks which come from essentially looking at what I did here. I created these in the Linux terminal, where I've created visualizations using text. So making images again out of text, and then physicalizing them. So I find it another kind of pleasant absurdity, the idea of taking the internet and putting it on a wall. Like, so take some, and this is built from the audience transcript. So these visualizations are actually commemorative of the audience participation, rather than even our own artworks that we as the artist roster put together. So so this is something I'm quite interested to continue exploring. Is like, how do you take the internet and put it in a physical space? So yes, I call that a data block, and that's another one of the outcomes that we've got. So so essentially the show is up on heistart.com, and it will be for as long as we want it to be, because I've basically got it running on a loop. So you can get in there, you can actually interrupt it as much as you like, if you wish to. So, and that's it, that's me. So if anybody's on heistart.com right now, you can start interrupting it.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I'm going to unmute everyone and we can do questions. Everyone should be able to unmute themselves now, and if probably go to gallery view, if that's all right. I'll just stop the share. Brilliant, amazing. We have a couple of questions in the chat, I think, already, so I'll maybe start with those. Lose my voice, and then we can go to questions from everyone else. So one sec, scrolling up. So I think the first question was from Nick, and he was asking about is your program translating images into ASCII, are live then printing them to the IRC channel, or are they pre-converted? And then he goes on to say, or was the conversion example showing us how ASCII art relates to normal images? And then I think he then goes to say, maybe you answered that later on.
Okay.
There's a question. I think you've answered that by describing how you did some work with the artists involved to translate them to ASCII. Follow up though, how much was involved in manipulating the images to have them work in ASCII?
Great question. So that is a very good question. I can give you, am I still sharing my screen?
No, I've stopped. Do you want me to?
Okay.
You can share it.
No, it's okay. I'll just address it verbally then. So what I noticed is that some images would have an amount of light and color, which meant that it would come out as a kind of confusing mess. So with some images, what I did was I converted them into monochrome bitmap, then converted them into ASCII. So that means that some of them came out looking like much starker and with clearer geometry. So it was on a case-by-case basis. So, for example, we've got a picture of a sword, like a photograph of a real fake Japanese sword, and that image came through. I found that the texture on that, when it was converted into monochrome, came through like a kind of lush matrix-esque kind of waterfall of characters, whereas when it wasn't in monochrome, it was very difficult to actually see the sword in relation to its background. So there was a limited amount of manipulation. For Billy Culler's Coca-Cola chair, for example, what I did there is I did go into that image, well, not I say image, I went into the text file and I inserted Coca-Cola in ASCII text, just like how the exhibition has big, like essentially large letters. So with some, in order to make it more pronounced, I did that. So, and I think I probably added in for Murney Wern's hazmat suit, I would have popped in, this is not just any hazmat suit, just because it's, yeah, so that there's a text actually inside it. So when there was text that I thought would be something which would enhance the artwork, then I would manipulate it. But I think there was probably 4 of them. 3 of them I would have converted to monochrome, and 1 of them I added, or 2 of them I added text to.
We've got another one. How do you feel about Slack, MS Teams repackaging IRC for the corporate world? You can tell this is like a different language to me.
Well, that's a great question. Okay, so basically IRC, so this is what I was saying a bit about the origin of how we chat. Like, for example, Slack is what coders, people that work in tech, would use Slack typically. Now, Slack is essentially like IRC. It is virtually identical, but it's a paid-for product most of the time by enterprise companies. I personally have always been a big fan of using IRC. So, like, although now I am using Slack to communicate with my, so I, you know, as a professional hacker, I communicate with my colleagues using Slack. It is, I mean, it's very similar to IRC, but you can share images, you can share real images. And this is, like I mentioned earlier, that a GIF could be 1 meg. Like, one of my colleagues had sent me a GIF that was 1 meg. So another hacker sent me an image, and it was just like a completely benign image, and it was 1 megabyte, which actually shocked me a little bit. So I think with seeing IRC being repackaged and basically made into enterprise, I think if it enables communication between people, great. I think the benefit of Slack is that you can use emojis and you can react to things with emojis. And I think that helps set the tone a lot, because when it's just text, text by itself can be ambiguous, but text with a really, like a little laughing parrot, is clearly joking. So I think from the perspective of IRC becoming obsolete, like, it seemed, I'm quite sad about that. For example, I have WhatsApp, I have like a number of WhatsApp groups, and including one of them, which is full of all the best hackers that I know in the world. And they're lovely, lovely, very, very, very bright people, and I'm very lucky to have them in my network. But the new WhatsApp data privacy policy means people are deleting WhatsApp because they don't want it to have anything to do with Facebook. So I feel that that aspect is more problematic to the hacker community, and I think that's going to be quite disruptive because it is invasive in privacy terms what WhatsApp and Facebook are looking to achieve. And with Slack and Teams, I think of Teams as being this. It's not something that I would ever really. I hope I never have to use it very much. So that Slack is okay, and actually, I'm in a Slack group for definitely like the best hackers that I have ever been in a network with all around the world. We have this invite only chat system, and yeah, that runs on Slack. So I think it's a shame to see IRC dying out, but also that Slack isn't that bad, but it would be, yeah, if as long as it stays free for people that use it and minimal amount. Yeah, rant over.
I think we've got a question from Robert. Robert, do you want to unmute, or do you want me to ask? There we go.
So my question to the panel is, are there any limits to what you would steal, appropriate, or reuse for an artwork or project?
I think well, let's see, okay. In terms of to the what, right? To speak about the what, I would say no to the what. No, there are no limits. I would then envelop that within how is it done, and is it done honestly? Because I'm a big believer in being as honest as possible when you're being dishonest or doing something unethical. Be as honest as possible about it. Do it transparently and do it with complete transparency, and within that envelope, rip off anything.
What was that?
So can I just follow up with it? So could you give like an example? So how would that play out in practice? I mean, trying to think of a good example. I mean, well, if you could take the Mona Lisa, would you do so? Or I mean, or is it intellectual property? Or if somebody's spent 5 years on a book, and then I don't know, I'm just trying to map out the territory.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say if it was a book, let's say you've written a book and I want to rip the book off. I would I'd be open about ripping the book off, but then present it in a way that doesn't compromise the original work. So for example, putting everything in alphabetical order, or changing it into an ancient Sumerian alphabet that is unreadable, but then crediting the original creator of it. That's the kind of approach I take. So be completely transparent about ripping it off, but do it in a way that doesn't actually cause anybody any discomfort.
What about if your work then gets hacked? How do you feel if it's done to you?
Well, we did. That's it. We did. As in, well, I mean, the show got hacked. But yeah, so if somebody was to rip off my work, I'd be flattered. That'd be great. I'd encourage that as much as possible.
And we've got another question in the chat. What was the hack used to hack the server on the night of the show?
Okay, so basically, to achieve, right, so there were some restrictions that were put in place for the what's called the IRC client. So when you go onto highstart.com, it opens up and there are ways of reaching this, actually interacting with the server, which is beneath the IRC client. Now, of course, the interesting part about that question is that it's I'd be giving you a how-to on how to hack the server, which essentially, right, it relates to aliases. So without completely giving the game away, it relates to aliases. So if you can change the aliases, you can execute a command on the server.
Well, Richard, do you want to ask it, or do you want me to ask for you? You can, yeah, go for it.
Either way, hi, Matthew. What's the difference between a genuine fake and a fake?
Oh, a genuine fake is honest about being fake.
As opposed to
if it's
I
fake,
think Masquerade as the original.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which are you in favour of?
I suppose it depends if it's your birthday or someone else's birthday and you want to give them a Louis Vuitton bag. Do you want to spend £15 at Deptford Market, or would you prefer to receive the real thing? I think I like the idea, as I was saying to Robert, I like the idea of being transparent about anything being counterfeit or stolen. So I would say I'm in favour of fakes. But yeah, genuine fakes.
But are we ever at a point where in that scenario you're never in any doubt?
I think if we're not in doubt about something, we're convinced that it's true or real. And that makes me think of my favourite Nietzsche quote: "Convictions are a more dangerous enemy of the truth than lies." So we should question everything, keep our options open.
But does the genuine fake masquerade openly, or it does?
Oh yeah.
So in terms of appropriating for artwork, there's never any doubt that it's not real.
There's also I think if we include in scope notions like crypto amnesia, if we have an idea and we forgot that we saw it somewhere else. So from that basis, I suppose I'm keeping my options open. But yeah, you never know if what you're thinking is real.
I mean, I think what I'm trying to sort of nudge towards, although I'm a bit out of my depth given your area, is this idea of a sense of suspending disbelief, and where the magic might lie in terms of having the wool pulled over one's eyes. So if you're in doubt about whether it's a genuine article or not, there's a kind of ambivalence there. Whereas if you know it's fake from the off, then isn't something lost at that point?
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think that in terms of how, in the within the context of Heist, you wouldn't know that it was ripped off unless you were told. So that there has to be a certain candidness to that. And like, for example, with Paula's submission, it's 10% Versace, she says in her words. So what that actually means, we still have that mystery, because I don't know what the 10% is. So there is still that that ambivalence and that ambiguity, which I hope doesn't make it's not too stark. So I think I would hope that Heist has kept some of the magic there. I hope we've hit the sweet spot in stealing things just right.
Okay, Mona Lisa included.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions?
I do have one actually, which is really boringly technical, probably. But why green? I mean, why is it green? I know it's been green since forever, but why green?
Why green? I reckon it probably relates back to computers before the ones that I was into. Like I'm reminded of the War Games aesthetic, the movie War Games. I reckon that was probably green on black. Yeah, I think also.
Well, really early video games were green on black as well.
Yeah. I wonder. Yeah, I'm not sure as to the origin of the green. I think maybe it comes to do with readability.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's readability and also cheapness because they were CRT technology. There were also early ones were orange. There was some orange and black. I remember using an orange and black one. That dates me.
I remember the quill.
Yeah.
It's a great museum in Cambridge with all the old technology. So you can go and play like the N64 and Pac-Man and stuff. It's quite good. I don't think it's open currently, obviously, but it's worth it. It's worth popping in. It's really good. I've got a question around. I was thinking about the other day about the fact that on the kind of like more crime side of hacking, do you think that criminals, like we've had to adapt to being online, do you think criminals have also had to adapt? So are more people learning to hack because they can't? I was thinking like people can't be burgled as easily anymore because we're in our homes all the time. So do you think that the classic kind of Home Alone burglar style character is now learning how to hack? Yeah,
absolutely. So I'll give you a case in point. There's a type of crime called mandate fraud. Now, mandate fraud is incredibly straightforward to pull off. So let's assume that I am a burglar and I am adapting to a new way. I'm basically retraining in cyber as per the government's instructions. And what I could do is I could go onto the internet and I could buy something. I could just like how to hack. I could look up how to hack someone. And it would probably try to sell me some software. And then I would be like, okay, I'll buy the software. And then all you got to do at that point is get people to run the software. Or you might be able to buy a list of people that have already done it. And then at this point, right, you have, I mean, I have seen tradespeople being targeted because they've, like, so for example, a plumber or a builder or somebody could have their email hacked. And then essentially the burglar has become somebody that just sits watching people's emails using software that they bought for 50 quid, say, off the internet. And they just wait for the word invoice. They wait for a tradesperson to be at a point where they are ready to send an invoice, and they just change it. They change the bank details on it. And I've heard of several, like this is a really growing problem. And it's very important to check bank details on an invoice that you've received over email. Check that on the phone with the person, because it becomes a very sticky legal battle. If you've got, on the one hand, you've got somebody who's just had their bathroom fitted or something, and you've got a builder on the other side who's had their email hacked, but they didn't realise it. Who's liable? It can be very sticky. So they're definitely retraining. And I think like the notion of targeting like tradespeople, that is, it's not like trying to hack, hack a bank or something. It's basically just encouraging somebody to run a piece of software called a Trojan, and then just sitting and waiting for it. So yeah, I definitely think they're retraining in cyber.
And do you think by being a hacker, you're less likely to be able to be hacked? Like it gives you the skills to be more secure?
Well, it's something to be mindful of, is that, those annoying pop-ups where software says, oh, can I update your software? Right, and you go, I'll do it tomorrow. Right. The story is, like, as a hacker, what we do at the end of what's called an engagement, we'll write up a report. And that report will more often than not say, you didn't update your software, that's why it was possible to hack you. So just by virtue of every time that we as professionals, every time we give a recommendation, if we ignore that recommendation ourselves, we kind of go, I shouldn't really be doing this. So we're already armed with all the best practice. So it's something that is down to the individual. And a lot of the time it's down to laziness. Those 2 or 10 or 20 websites that you got the same password for, because it's easier to remember, isn't it? So there will, of course, be hackers that still do that. So I think although we are armed with best practice, we're researching it every day, we're working with it every day, but also that makes us quite good targets as well, because if you hack somebody that hacks 20 different organizations a month, then as a kind of second order hacker, you get access to all of that. There have absolutely been very high profile cases, such as what's called the Shadow Brokers hack. That's quite nasty. The NSA hacking group got hacked and all of their tools got leaked. So by virtue of being a hacker, it does make you a target to other slightly less benevolent ones. But yeah, everybody can be a target if they're walking around with a bullseye on their head. So it's important just to make sure it's not one there.
Well, thanks. Do you have any future ambitions for new projects? What's next?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we've got some really fun ones coming up. So at the minute, what's in the pipeline is we've got one called Keto 432 or Ark Arrival, and it's an online exhibition of fake conspiracy theories. So we've got quite a few people on this at the minute, and I've infiltrated a Telegram group of conspiracy theorists, and we're going to put on the show actually in the context of conspiracy theory, like actual people that are making it happen, QAnon. So we're going to put on an art exhibition inside QAnon without them realizing, and kind of document that. And we're going to see if we can get some fake conspiracy theories to catch on. So, for example, there's a very good one which is called Finland Does Not Exist, which Calzone, who hacked the Heist server, put me onto, and it's a conspiracy theory that suggests that Finland is just a made-up country, and so somebody made that up for a laugh, and it caught on. So that is an enormous success. There was also another great one this week that a guitar pedal, the schematic for a guitar pedal, is actually the mind control 5G vaccine COVID chip. And that's genius. So we want to see about getting some really good fake conspiracy theories into the stream of chatter with the QAnon people, and kind of tip the balance a bit, because it got, I mean, let's face it, like the last week has been a bit dark in terms of the like conspiracy theorists. So we want to see if we can lighten the mood a bit with some really positive conspiracy theories, and actually put it on in Telegram and then document it on the website. So that's one of them. And I've also got another one, which I think anybody that's interested in the environment, for example, would be very interested in, and it's called Leave Me, a message. And that's an exhibition which is going to be on a phone number. So you dial the phone number, and then you get to listen to the opinions and guidance of environmental activists and professionals and people who are experts in the field around saving the planet, saving the natural resources, animals, and so on. And that's going to be the wisdom of these professionals, but narrated by children. And you get to go through the phone system making choices, such as, am I going to throw this plastic container on the floor in the sea, or am I going to recycle it? And you can press 1 or 2, and if you don't make a choice, the choice is made for you. And that will be a 20-minute long like phone line exhibition. And then at the end, the audience will get to leave a message. So ultimately, it's about why we would want to leave Earth and what would force us to leave Earth. And then that will follow on to another show, which will be based on the audience reactions, so based on the recordings, and it's called Left You, a message. So it's about what happens to the human species and to the planet Earth after we leave, after we've colonized Mars, what happens, and creating visualizations. So if for example, we could have an audience member say, I think that there'll be 8-foot tall cockroaches that live on Earth, and we'll have the artists can create this world of cockroaches, and then you can walk around in it, for example, in Left You, a message. Yeah, and also another one that I've been wanting to do this for 5 years, but I've started getting the wheels in motion on this one, which is actually having an exhibition, like a window exhibition of the history of memes. So showing, so basically I've been collecting memes, and I've got a meme group. Some of the audience might be in it, and having a dynamic a gallery on the street. So it's a gallery space that you can't go into. It's from the internet, but you can't view it on the internet, because if you want memes, you just you're already on the internet. So it'll be also like a way of encouraging people to leave their house and just go for a walk somewhere with a lot of footfall. So I'm thinking of doing that on Hackney Road. So it gives people like a reason to go out, get on your bike, go and look at the internet through a gallery window.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it. Any final questions? Oh, here we go. Got one in the chat. Is AI generated art, original art, genuine, fake, or just fake? Does the machine learning methodology used make a difference?
What good question. I think the interesting thing there is that you need to be told that it's AI generated. So, for example, I saw Trevor Paglin's exhibition Blossom at the Pace Gallery, and that was very interesting because I didn't know that was AI generated. I didn't realize at the time the images that I was looking at, which I found to be quite stunning. I didn't realize that Trevor Paglin was recreating nature, like nature photographs of flowers using AI. So those were fake flowers. I didn't realize they were fake until I was told, which is always, I think, the hallmark of something really, really quite thought-provoking. So the methodology that's employed, I think, again, that is an extension of being told how something was made and why it exists. And that's I think that it can become a property of the artwork, especially if the if the machine learning method that's employed is open sourced. Then it means that there's another dimension to the work. So I would say that those flowers that I saw at the Pace Gallery, they were fake, but I didn't know they were fake. And I think, yeah, that's an interesting attribute.
Okay, brilliant. Last questions? Okay, we do this every time. If we could just unmute and give Matthew a massive round of applause. Thank you so much for speaking for us tonight. Excellent.
Hey! Excellent.